Okay, so we're going to talk about natural selection, and you can't talk about natural selection without referencing where it originally came from. So, Charles Darwin was an amateur naturalist who travelled on a ship known as the HMS Beagle. Got a very dramatic representation of it in this image here. And basically, he recorded observations of his study of the natural environment in places such as the Galapagos Islands, which are circled in red here off the coast of South America, and also he stopped off in, well, Western Australia, in places like Albany, if my pen works here, great, and over in New Zealand as well. Now, his observations of species in lots of places around the world led to the development of the theory of natural selection, and this is what we're going to discuss in this lesson. So there are a few key tenets of Darwin's theory of natural selection, and the first of these is this idea of variation. Now, we've spoken about variation previously, where variation is simply a variety of genes within a population or a gene pool, and we know that we can only get new variation thanks to mutation, which is a permanent change to the DNA of an individual within a population. Secondly, birth rate. So an organism generally will produce more offspring than can be sustained by the environment, but the environment is going to restrict that thanks to this idea of nature's balance. So species numbers tending to remain relatively constant because a certain number are always going to die out before they're capable of reproducing. Fourth, there is a struggle for existence within the environment, so an excessive birth rate, competition for limited resources, so things like food, habitat, water, shelter, all of these things are going to result in a struggle for existence for members of a particular species. We also have fifth, one of the most pivotal ideas with the theory of natural selection is this idea of the survival of the fittest. So organisms with favourable characteristics or alleles are more likely to survive and consequently more likely to reproduce. Survival of the fittest itself is going to be determined largely by selective pressure or a selective agent. Now, this is an environmental factor that is acting on a particular population, and what it does is it selects for particular alleles. Now, this is not a conscious decision. This is simply the impact of a factor on this population. So, for instance, when we spoke about the struggle for existence a moment ago, we said that competition for limited resources like food, water, shelter is a really big issue, and it causes this struggle for things to survive. It's also an example of a selective pressure. Disease is another one, commonly found in populations where those who have alleles which allow them to better cope with and survive particular diseases will survive. Those who don't will die out and not be able to reproduce. And finally, we also have predation. So you could think of this very simply as organisms who are better equipped based on their genetic composition to escape from a predator are going to survive and reproduce. Those which are too slow or not well suited based on their genetic composition will be eaten, die out, and not reproduce. So this here is another quick summary, or I say quick, another summary of some of these features of natural selection. So I'm not going to go through variation again, we've just discussed it. But effectively what we really want to look at with variation is the variation of phenotypes, not so much the genotypes. Secondly, overproduction, so this is referring to the birth rate, right, that we've just spoken about, and to keep it consistent, I did birth rate in green, so we'll do that again here. So if we have an overproduction of offspring, it's generally going to exceed the capacity of the environment, and this is going to create competition, which is one of these selective agents. Okay. From there, we have this process of selection, and this is where something is selected, and this comes back to our idea of the survival of the fittest. So I'll highlight this in purple here. This selection is where one phenotype is more suitable for the particular environment than another, and this is going to lead to this idea of the survival of the fittest, where only those with the best phenotype for a particular environment will survive, and those who don't have that phenotype will not survive. So this survival of the fittest in here. The final key step with natural selection is while an organism might be more suited to an environment, it doesn't really mean anything for the overall allele frequency unless they're able to reproduce. So organisms that are able to reproduce will then pass on these alleles. Now, we've spoken about mutations previously, and we've said, okay, there's somatic mutations and there's germline mutations. If this is a somatic mutation to an allele, it's going to confer an advantage to that individual, but it won't be passed on to their offspring. So this here is looking very specifically at a favourable allele in the germline cells. Okay, so the cells which constitute the gametes and provide the genetic information for offspring. If the favourable allele is found in offspring, then it will be able to continue throughout the gene pool and it will ultimately change the allele frequency. So we've spoken about some of the selective pressures. We said competition, we said disease, we said predation, but there's also other factors as well. So environmental factors can be simply changes to the environment itself and the composition of the environment. We can have competition, again, as we've said, for food, water and shelter. And the one that we haven't spoken about has been sexual selection. So this can be in some species, such as in peacocks, for instance, where there is selection of mates depending on their tail feathers of the male. As we move down, another example is the rocket pocket mouse. Now, this is a particular nice case study. I'm not going to dive into it right now, but if you want, you can pause and have a read there. The final one that we have spoken about previously is the peppered moth. We previously mentioned that the rare form was the black moth. However, during the Industrial Revolution, the white moth stood out more on the soot of trees in the urban environment. So the white moth was more easily seen by predators, and this led to a decrease in the composition of the white allele in the population and an increase in the allele frequency of the black peppered moth. Another example, body stature in humans. So what we've noticed generally is that in very cold environments, individuals with long bodies and short limbs have a really small surface area to volume ratio, and these individuals, as a consequence, have a survival advantage in these colder environments. When we talk about warmer environments, though, there's a slight difference there in terms of the body composition. Finally, probably one of the most common ones today, scarily, is antibiotic-resistant bacteria. So over on the left, you can see that we have mostly normal bacteria and one bacteria which is resistant to a particular antibiotic. In our second slide here, if I number these, in our second slide, we can see that we've now applied a particular antibiotic to this group here, represented by the green background, if you like. What's happened as a consequence is most of the bacterium have died out. The one resistant bacterium has survived, and there's also been one normal bacteria that survived as well. Now, these antibiotics, specifically the resistant ones, in slide 3, have been able to proliferate and to reproduce still, despite the presence of the antibiotic. We've had a few normal bacteria that have as well, but also a few more have died out. But ultimately, the allele frequency for the normal bacteria fades away, and as we can see in stage 4, the only bacteria left are those that are resistant to the antibiotic. Now, this is posing a bit of an issue for us as humans today, especially as, due to the overuse of some antibiotics, we're finding that some bacteria are no longer susceptible to the effect of the antibiotic and continue to proliferate anyway.